Perfect. Hey, everybody. Welcome, welcome. Glad everybody's here for this presentation on navigating GSA schedule audits and the like. This has been kind of a hot topic I've seen recently with a number of clients, and I know Leo, who introduced himself in a second, does a lot of these things as well. My name is Cy Alba. I'm a partner here at the law firm of Polaro Mazza, and I'm our current chair of our GovCon group. We do all things government contracts related to, appeals, bid protests, these audits and investigations, false claim act defense work, all that kind of stuff, and just general compliance. We also have a labor and employment group, a M&A sort of corporate practice, a construction group, and our standard litigation practice. So we have a lot of different things for small, mid-sized companies in particular, and some large businesses. And I'm here with Leo. Leo, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Yeah. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Leo Alvarez. I'm a partner at Baker Tilly. At Baker Tilly, my practice focuses on supporting clients who are managing compliance with their GSA schedule contracts. So very apropos for today. We often find ourselves working with outside counsel on different audit and contract investigation matters. So we've helped settle a number of mandatory disclosures and FCA matters over the years. So looking forward to the discussion today. Yeah, and some background, just for a second on Baker Tilly. We're an accounting and consulting firm. We have offices all throughout the United States and in certain locations around the world. We currently sit at around 6,000 total employees. A lot of what we do is traditional tax and audit work, but we also have a consulting group that provides a full range of business advisory services. I sit in our government contractor solutions practice that's based in Washington, D.C., where all we do all day, every day is help companies who provide product and service to the federal government. So we help address a wide variety of issues from, proposal matters to contract management to cost accounting, and then providing support when things go wrong, in relation to some of the compliance obligations. So we think that compliance mindset helps set us apart and think critically about, going ahead and managing government contracts. So looking forward again to the chat today.
Perfect. I kind of went through our stuff already. All right, so overview. I think we're going to set the table a little bit first, talk about the GSA schedules, sort of what they are in case folks need a little primer, and the different types, especially CSP versus TDR, given what's going on right now. And that has direct implications on some of the audits and investigation side. And then we're going to go through what some of the pre-award audits are, post-award audits, some of the settlement issues, mandatory disclosure questions, and just generally how to navigate these things and what the implications are. So I guess let's jump right into the overview on schedules. GSA schedules, right? They're multiple award schedules is also what they're called, or GSA schedules. They're different from your standard IDIQs. They fall under a completely different section of the FAR 8.4 instead of FAR Part 16/15. And so there are different rules, and we won't get into all this stuff, but like bid protests are different, and the rules about procuring things off the schedule are different. And more recently, they've taken all different kinds of schedules. There used to be many of them, and they've consolidated them all into a single schedule, which makes it easier to deal with. And it's certainly more modern and a more streamlined procedure. It makes a lot of sense because then people can just buy from you instead of under the old method. Maybe your company did multiple different things, but you only got, let's say, an IT 70, which was your general IT services schedule, but you did certain services like management consulting services, but you didn't have your MOBIS schedule. Well, you couldn't bid on both of those things. You have to find a team member, do a CTA, all kinds of confusing stuff. So the consolidation there, I think, makes it much easier for companies to get in and do more work in various different sectors, so long as they've done that work and they can get the labor categories and the SINs on their schedule. More recently, we can go to the next slide. More recently, SBA has also created a special 8A pool. And so I just want to note that here because it is so new. And it's a separate pool for only 8A companies. In the past, you used to be able to, or GSA used to be able to get 8A credit by setting aside certain task orders for 8A set aside work or serviceable vet or anything like that. So they would set aside work as an 8A task order. They'd have to go to SBA, they'd have to get their permission to bring that requirement into the 8A program and then solicit it through the schedule. This new pool would obviate the need for all of that. So if someone is eligible for an 8A contract, they will get onto this new pool. GSA will look you up. If you're a current contract holder and you're an 8A firm and you're currently eligible, you can be brought into this pool and you'll be eligible to bid work. However, if you had a schedule already and you graduated from the 8A program, but arguably would still be eligible under the standard 5-year rule, they're not going to convert you over, is my understanding. I haven't heard of anyone getting converted over who's already graduated. And so that's currently, I think, where things stand with this new pool. It's just going to allow more streamlined awards to people that have an 8A designation. And so GSA won't have to go through that extra step of going to SBA and getting their permission and everything else. They can just get it accepted and award it right on the schedule. It is going to be just like any other 8A procurement, so you can get sole source awards and all of those issues as well, so long as you're still in the program. So again, for sole source awards, you have to be in the 8A program at the time of award, not just time of bid. Whereas for standard competitive awards under this pool or generally, if you're in the 8A program when you submit your offer, then you're good and you can get awarded the contract, even if, let's say, it's protested over and over and doesn't get awarded for years and you're graduated at that time, you should still be good and you can perform the work. So just sort of a streamlined process, and hopefully it'll be helpful for contractors as they go through some of this. Okay, going forward into the meat of everything. When it comes to audits and investigations, most of the time it comes down to some sort of pricing problem, right? That you've either charged the government too much and you didn't give them the appropriate discount, or you had commercial work that was going on that was under a certain labor category that lined up closely to your labor categories on the schedule. And because you billed the commercial work at a lower rate, then that triggers the price reductions clause, and the government was entitled to that lower rate. All of those issues, though, fall under this first bucket, and it's commercial sales practices, CSP, which is the historic way that all GSA schedules were put together. So going back a while, when the GSA schedules were first put together and all the way through 2016, there was this process where you had to show GSA ongoing or past performance of these commercial sales practices so that they could evaluate what it is you've been selling, what the value is of your pricing historically, and also sort of set a benchmark for whoever your most favored customer was going to be. And when you had all that data, then you could put together your SINs and your labor categories and all your different pricing for all your different labor categories based upon those commercial sales practices. Your basis of award customer, your most favored customer, was then put in place, and it was a customer that generally was understood to be a good benchmark of your commercial sales practices and your pricing. And that group of customers was then used as the basis of award. What that generally means is that because of the price reductions clause, if you sold some particular good or service to someone in this basis of award customer pool that was lower than what the promised price was on the GSA schedule, including the discount. So usually there's a few percentage points that you promised GSA that you will never sell to anyone outside of the federal government or state governments and people who are using the schedule. You will never sell to anyone outside of the schedule this particular labor category at a price lower than this amount, including the discount. So if it's $100 is your GSA schedule, and you said you're going to give a 5% discount to GSA, then if you sold something to a commercial customer at $94, that would be impermissible. And if it was in the same base civil war, that would be impermissible, and it would trigger the price reductions clause, thereby changing your lowest price on the schedule instead of being, or your highest price rather, instead of being $100, which is what you originally negotiated, it would go down to 94. And if you kept doing that over time or kept giving discounts, it would actually continue to reduce the price to whatever it is that is the lowest price that you've sold commercially. That's all under the traditional model. And that is also where, in my experience, most of the audits or investigations that we've dealt with and any sort of false claim issues have arisen out of those sort of older commercial sales practices rules, and in particular the price reductions clause. Because what often happens is companies aren't tracking their commercial sales very carefully. I can't tell you how many companies have the GSA schedule and don't realize that their commercial sales matter, or if they do, or maybe one person in the company did and they left, but if they do, they're not really paying careful attention to it. And then what happens is, for some reason, they're audited, or there's a whistleblower, or something like that occurs. And then when we start looking at it, or when the IG, let's say GSA, starts looking at it, they ask for all this data on your commercial sales, you provide information, and then they start to notice that you've been giving discounts to commercial customers that are below the allowable limit. And then they'll start to go back in time. When did this first start to happen? If they find it, let's say in 2022, they're looking at data and they're like, well, this was too low. They might ask you, have you ever started charging this amount or less, or when did this start? We need to see that document. And they keep going back in time. Generally, they can go back 6 years. So if they keep going back in time up to 6 years, they could then say, oh, we noticed that 5 years ago, you sold this thing at even a lower rate below what it should have been at the time. So that reset your highest price that you could charge the government. And if it's a major labor category or multiple labor categories that you provide work under to the federal government, that new highest price would be what all your contracts should have been, say in this example, for the past 5 years. And that can be a lot of money. If you have millions in contracts, let's say, or say $100 million in contracts, and the government is saying your price should have been 10% lower 5 years ago, then you might owe 10% of everything back to the government because you overcharged. Now, obviously, it depends on the math, what exactly you would owe, but that's the way the commercial sales practices and the price reductions clause works in practice. When you're dealing with the newer system, which is an opt-in system, so the default is still CSP, but if you opt in rather to the TDR, then that's transactional data reporting. It's an ongoing process where you provide information. I think Leo's going to go into this more, but you provide data to the government on a regular basis, to GSA every month, so that they can track the sales you're making to the government, as opposed to the old rule, which was it's up to you to track everything you're doing commercially and sort of tell on yourself or readjust your prices if you trip that price reductions clause. The new system is more where you're just doing monthly reporting, paying attention to everything you're doing and pushing that forward. The good news is there is no price reductions clause under the TDR. You're just providing the information to GSA. There's more things you have to provide. You have to do it every month, and you have to give them a list of information. But I don't think it's as scary, because if something does come up, you kind of don't have that same risk of them going all the way back in time and claiming there was a violation and saying you owe money back for the past 4, 5, 6 years and adding that all up, which can be problematic, especially with interest and other things that start to accrue.
Yeah, one thing I wanted to contribute here, the management under TDR, at least from a compliance risk standpoint, is obviously reduced because of the lack of the PRC monitoring. There are 11 data fields that are currently tracked right now. We're going to talk about how GSA has continued to manage the rollout of the program and some of the criticism that they've come under. One of the interesting things that I think industry should take note of, earlier this year, there was a class deviation that GSA issued related to their GWACs, MACs, and IDIQs, where they expanded the number of data fields that would be collected under transactional data reporting from 11 to 33. So, GSA, as it relates to the schedules, isn't ready for that kind of expansion. But if they're doing it on GWACs, MACs, and some of their other IDIQs, I think Polaris and Oasis are some of the ones where we see that. What's to stop them from doing that in the future and asking for that kind of information? So, I think time will tell which construct is best for contractors, and I think each contractor needs to take a look at their own unique business and what pricing looks like and what would be the best model for them, especially from a liability standpoint. But there is more to come with TDR, because GSA is very much behind the program, despite some of the criticism that they've come under.
Yeah, it's only for certain sins. I don't know if you want to go to the next slide, just so people can see it. It's certain sins are eligible for TDR. And to piggyback off what Leo was saying, I think part of the issue here is if you think about TDR, I kind of think about it in like kind of the big data context, where with commercial sales practices, they were looking at things that you did, and then you sort of use that to build up some pricing. And then you could sort of control what happens in a way, whereas commercially, as long as you're not giving added discounts to commercial customers that you can't justify, then you would be generally safe. You could also tailor it so that your labor categories on your schedule are done in a particular way so that the definition of what that labor category entails is something specific to what you're selling to the government. And even if there's something similar that you're selling commercially, if you've defined everything the right way, you could arguably say that, well, that's something, the thing I'm selling commercially at a lower price, it's similar, is still different because of X, Y, and Z. And then that wouldn't trip the price reductions clause. So there were things you could do to manage that risk that, as long as you're paying attention to it, was fairly clear. Where TDR can be interesting in this big data concept is what is going to happen not to you tomorrow, because arguably there's probably less risk if you're not paying attention in the commercial sales practice context and you get hit with a price reductions clause, it can be costly. But if you are paying attention, not sure what exactly you're getting out of the TDR piece, because you're essentially building up a data set for GSA in the future, that the more people who participate, the more data they're going to gather. And just my sort of personal take is that that's just going to allow them to question pricing, higher pricing in particular, in the future, because they're going to be able to see everything under the sun. Like, imagine if you're going to negotiate with a contractor to do something at your house, let's say, and you've talked to 3 or 4 contractors, gotten some quotes. Okay, that's good. But what if you had access to sort of big data where every contractor in your region had to report all of their pricing to a particular body, and you could just go and look up and say, this is the work that's being done, here's what I'm going to pay, right? It's out of context, of course. It's probably too simplistic. And so you or I might know, well, my project is a little particular and I don't want to pay the lowest price. I want somebody in the middle. Or this is very important to me. It's a centerpiece of my house. I'm going to pay a lot because I want like good craftsmanship. You can have that choice. Whereas I think what the government, this is my theory, is going to do in the long term is kind of look at all that and say, well, who can give it to us at this price? Or we don't think your new GSA schedule that you're trying to apply for, we don't think that price is reasonable. Like, what are you talking about? This is what we've been selling for years. You say, well, we put it in this little mass data model of ours, and it spit out that you're 2 standard deviations from the mean, so it's not reasonable. I mean, this is not something that I don't think happening right now, but it's just something to think about with everyone participating in the program, and that's sort of my maybe conspiracy theory. I don't know. But I think, Leo, you're going to go through some of the more concrete.
Next slide. Yeah, so we're often asked to comment on the advantages and disadvantages of the 2 pricing constructs. This slide is our attempt to do so. I will caveat to say that every contractor is unique, and some of the characteristics and may exhibit, some certain characteristics that would challenge what you see on the screen here. But so we're speaking at a very high level. Starting with the CSP model. For all of its flaws, the one thing that a CSP allows you to do is to communicate your unique value proposition. I think few would object to that assertion. Under a CSP, a company has to provide a written disclosure of how they price in the commercial marketplace and communicate their unique value prop to garner the best price. In a TDR world, a contracting officer no longer has to rely on that information. That's an important thing to consider, and I think weighs heavily as contractors think about participating in TDR in the future. We've found for certain premium service providers, for example, with very specialized and even niche subject matter expertise, where their labor prices may be higher than some of the limited GSA comparables, it often can be helpful to provide historical pricing information that accounts for unique terms and conditions surrounding a commercial transaction. Things like prepayment, anticipated volume, market penetration, startup phase pricing, the unique facts and circumstances around financial risk for going after a certain project. These are all things that can impact the bargain that is struck. And those are the kinds of things that can be described in a written CSP disclosure. So, in some instances, if done right, it can actually lead to higher margins and than I think would be achievable in a TDR construct, which is really going to be based off of horizontal comparisons of your price against other GSA approved vendors. So this is where your PM is going to be treated almost exactly the same as other PMs out there in the market, of course, calibrating for the unique education experience. But again, the pool of people that you're pulling from is going to vary, by your region and the schools that you're hiring from. So some of those things, they need to be accounted for. In terms of cons, obviously the audit risk is higher. The PRC can be uncomfortable to administer for organizations with a broad basis of award, and can lead to an inconsistent application of internal controls. I mean, the semi-annual reports to Congress have bared that out year after year, where every single year it seems a significant percentage of the audits show that there is a misunderstanding around the basic terms and conditions of a GSA schedule contract. So the compliance burdens with PRC monitoring are very real, but we found that with organizations that put an emphasis on it and know that it's important, it can be manageable. And then as for the TDR construct, here again, some of the pros are obviously a lower level of effort to propose and validate pricing. It's going to be based on a horizontal comparison, typically around what your price looks like relative to other GSA approved vendors. Of course, you can provide commercial information, but the overwhelming emphasis will be on those horizontal comparisons. There's lower audit risk due to the lack of PRC monitoring. And we found in many instances it can lead to lower margins, again, because you are comparing your pricing to other vendors in the government marketplace. And then, we've included some notes here that under the TDR construct, it's not unusual for COs to sometimes overreach. There's a a pricing, a policy and procedure memo that GSA has put out there that outlines some of the things that contracting officers need to keep in mind when they're under the TDR construct. They're not supposed to be overreaching, but we have seen in the past that COs can ask for commercial sales data and sometimes go a little too far. And then, of course, there's going to be a higher sales reporting administration that happens there. Can we go on to the next slide, please? So here we wanted to show sort of the lukewarm response, I think, from the IG in response to TDR over the years. There's been a number of reports that have been issued. These are 4 primary ones that we wanted to highlight. Fortunately for GSA, the IG's been remarkably consistent in their skepticism that the TDR program is the right path for the schedules program. You'll see at the very top there, 2 years after the debut of the pilot program, the IG issued an audit report finding that GSA's evaluation plan for TDR was inadequate. In 2021, the IG took aim again at the program, stating outright that GSA should implement an exit strategy as the program was found to not be meeting stated objectives. The data was inaccurate, unreliable. The contracting personnel weren't using the data, and there was even an inconsistent methods for conducting price analysis. A year later, the IG released a report which again called for the program's cancellation. The IG stated that GSA couldn't provide assurance that MAS contract pricing results in a quote unquote lowest overall cost alternative, which is interesting language, given that the GSA has tried to position the schedules program as a best value program. But they said that GSA was unable to provide that assurance regardless of whether the contractor participated in TDR or not. And they took things a step further in that report by recommending that agencies should perform their own independent price determinations, regardless of whether a contractor is on TDR or CSP, which to me felt like a big blow against the program itself, which is, put itself out there and prided itself on the fact that its pricing is fair and reasonable as vetted by the contracting personnel at GSA. And then you'll see in the very last report again, has continued to with that theme of moving away from TDR. So for me, you can see that there's divergent views about the effectiveness of the program. GSA has continued to say that they are taking steps to improve the use of the data by contracting personnel. Time will tell. In my opinion, I would not be surprised to see the program stop short of a further expansion, especially into the services arena, at least for the short term. But what this means for us today within the scope of this presentation is that CSPs are alive and well, especially for services companies. So it's prudent to understand what an audit is, what to look for, and how to be prepared. And that's what we're going to be going over here in the next few slides. Can we go on to the next one, please? So I wanted to start here by going through the 2 main contract clauses that govern the IG's audit authority. The first one, the 215.20 clause, is generally used to support pre-award audits, which most typically occur at the time of option exercise. The idea here is that GSA is performing an audit in advance of the award of an option. This particular clause gives pretty broad authority, as it gives the IG the right to review records that are pertinent to pricing, sales, and other data related to supplies and services. This is meant to allow the government to determine the reasonableness of pricing, which is, in the traditional GSA world means commercial sales are in play. And again, it remains to be seen what's going to be happening with TDR. To my knowledge, there have not been any audits of TDR contractors, but that may change in the future. And then the second clause that you'll see there is the examination of records clause. That's generally used to support post-award audits, which can occur during or after contract performance. You have similar broad language here around the type of information that the government can access, but commercial sales practice or commercial sales data, excuse me, are again on the table. The clause is specific to overbillings, billing errors, compliance with the PRC, and sales reporting clauses of the GSA contract, as you can see, they're highlighted on the screen. And again, contractors need to take care in how they establish their contracts and support their pricing. You really want an auditable trail of information that supports your pricing disclosures, something that an auditor can dig into, understand, and that you can point to and show that you're fulfilling your contractual obligations. You know, compliance and the associated artifacts here are very important. You know, what did you do as a contractor to ensure that you're following your key contract requirements, your PRC monitoring, your billing obligations? What artifacts can you point to show that you took steps to comply? That's what they'll be looking at here. Can we go on to the next slide? So, you know, I won't spend a lot of time here, but I think we should take a moment to discuss the annual contractor assessments from GSA. Overall, GSA says that these are intended to help contractors succeed, keep them educated about the program. These are not a comprehensive review of past or current compliance. Typically, it's performed annually. It's typically done virtually. The key areas of compliance that GSA is looking at when one of their industrial operations analysts go and visit you is going to be your sales tracking, your IFF reporting, maybe looking at your prompt payment terms, CA compliance, some of the labor qualification compliance. I've seen them ask for resumes related to labor, and they will probe lightly at your basis of award and PRC compliance during their assessment that they do. I believe it's every 4th year of every 5-year option. They have one where they really focus in on that issue. However, they can address other topics during their annual assessments. It's not unusual to hear of some IOAs being a little bit more aggressive on the BOA and PRC issue. So it's something to keep in mind. One thing I did want to point to, the VA administers a similar program. They piloted a contract review process in 2021 with their med-surg vendors. That process has been expanded to all VA FSS contract teams. So that's something that VA contractors are going to see more of in the future if they're not already. Next slide, please. So pre-award audits. So this really starts, I think, with the notification letter and the data request, which we'll show in detail in a moment. The data request can be fairly extensive and is meant to give the government all of the information it needs to confirm that your CSP disclosures are accurate and that the proposed pricing is fair and reasonable. The core of that is typically going to be 12 months of transactional sales data, copies of commercial and government contracts, quotes, and invoices. There's requests for policy and procedures, and it can be quite lengthy. Many organizations, I will say here, audit and immediately react negatively, thinking it's going to be an adversarial process, but if done right, it can be fairly straightforward. I wouldn't go so far as to say it's painless, not by any stretch, because it does require quite a bit of work, but it can be minimally disruptive if it's managed right. It's also important to note that the purpose of the audit is to present findings and help the GSA CO negotiate the most favored pricing in terms for the government. So along with examining the CSP, the IG will typically focus on your sales monitoring, your billing systems, your IFF administration, labor assignment to GSA schedule task orders by you as the contractor, and how you're managing your subs is a major issue, and then how well the contractor is able to accumulate and segregate other direct costs on T&M orders is also something that's focused on. Next slide, please. Historically, GSA has done approximately 40 to 50 pre-award audits. There are certain thresholds that we've heard that lead to the pool of contractors that the IG is focused on. I believe the threshold is if you're doing about 15 million annually, you're more likely to receive an audit. Here we wanted to provide an overview of what the typical timeline looks like for an option extension and how a pre-award audit folds into that. So 0 on the right-hand side of the screen is your contract's expiration date. If you've performed satisfactorily throughout the contract period, meaning you've paid your IFF on time, you've met all the minimum sales criteria, you've met your contract obligations, you're going to receive an automated notice 7 months before the contract expiration from your CO, which will notify you of the government's intent or not to extend the contract. If you do want to extend your contract, you're given 45 days to go ahead and submit a completed package. Completed package will have administrative items like your a confirmation as to whether you want to extend the contract, a confirmation whether your terms and conditions have remained the same or if they've changed, if your business size has changed. It'll ask for administrative items like your subcontracting plan. But the most important thing that they're going to be asking for is a confirmation around whether your CSP disclosures have changed. Once you've submitted the package, you will likely have to wait a few months to hear from GSA. They have an internal goal to have the contract extended 2 months prior to the contract end date, which you can see on the screen. Now, in terms of the pre-award notice, those typically go out as much as a year before the contract end date, and contractors are given about 2 months to go ahead and respond to the data request. This is why contractors, especially those that have been successful in the program, should be taking steps to conduct periodic compliance reviews, actively preparing for the possibility of a pre-award audit as they get closer to the 5th year, the final year of that GSA schedule contract. Many organizations that we've worked with will include a GSA review as part of their internal audit activities the year prior, so year 4, to the final year of the contract for their GSA schedule contract. So, some smaller organizations may not have an internal audit practice, but if you do, this should definitely be on the roster of activities that they're looking at as you get closer to year 5. One of the issues we quite frequently run into is, what happens if I don't have much in the way of commercial sales? Things have changed for my organization over the past 4 years. We find ourselves selling predominantly to federal agencies. What do you use as the basis of pricing? In instances like that, the IG will typically try to push you to a cost build and for establishing labor rates, which many commercial organizations are not ready for. And there are ways to establish pricing and keep it away from a cost build. You can rely on market research. But again, you don't want to be figuring out these things in the middle of all of this that's happening. You want to be prepared. So year 4 should be a year of more intense scrutiny over how it is that you're managing your contract, especially if you've been a thriving contractor. Can we go on to the next screen, please? So here, I know this is tough to see. Everyone's going to get the slides, but I wanted to show a snippet of the kind of information that the IG is asking. This is a bit of an older data request, but I think it'll illustrate what they're looking for. You'll see 12 months of data corresponding to the commercial sales practices form. They'll want it in Excel. They're asking for a data dictionary, a reconciliation of the sales data to your accounting and financial records. So this is going to be a big focus of what it is that you're going to be providing to the IG. Go on to the next slide, please. Here are the specific fields. You'll see there's the additional fields related to services. Next slide, please. And then quite a bit of documentation that will also be included in the package. So, price lists that were in effect during the GSA contract period, commercial, state, local, state and local. Support for reported GSA sales for the 2 most recent quarters, your current procedures, chart of accounts, your most recent audited financial statements, a list of BPAs. It goes on and on. So you'll see it's fairly lengthy. If you go into the next slide, there's additional list of items for services vendors. You'll see a list of internal labor categories and the related descriptions, as well as experience and education factors, written procedures, copy of DCA audit reports if you're audited by DCA. Detailed data of billable labor rates. So again, we wanted to make sure that you had this in hand so that you knew how deep this can go when you receive one of these. Next slide, please. Here we wanted to, provide a chart that shows the pre-award audit activity of the schedules program that's been conducted by GSA and VA. IG, the graph shows the value of the IG's estimated cost savings for implementing the recommendations from pre-award audits. A significant outlier in 2017 has to do with the VA IG audit that was quite large. Both the GSA and VA cost saving have increased by, I have a note here, about 140%, by over 140% in 2021. So, the value of the cost savings can vary widely year to year. So there's no apparent trend, but this should give you some context around the overall activity. Next slide, please. And then we get to post-award audit. So, these occur with much less frequency. GSA IG does about 10 of these year to year, but the numbers can vary. When they happen, they may be initiated as a result of something found in a pre-award audit, a contractor assessment, or something else that catches the contracting officer's eye. These can often be more in depth than a pre-award audit and may involve a review of very specific contractual pricing requirements. So, when we've seen them, they've been very focused on PRC issues and require an analysis of up to 5 years of sales data. So here the IG is focused on helping GSA calculate a full refund for amounts owed to the government for a non-compliance. So a lot of those issues that we talked about earlier will be similar in a pre-award audit, but the scale of it will be much larger given that we're looking at an entire contract period and not a single year of CSP data. And Sai, I think I'm passing it back to you.
Yeah, so now kind of everybody's favorite topic. This is what happens if you get caught with an audit and something occurs, right? And there's been a number of settlements. Usually I'll say the things that I've dealt with, the government tends to look at it from the perspective of you did something, let's say you tripped the price reductions clause because you were selling at a lower price. Maybe you didn't realize it or you weren't paying attention. I haven't seen them take it to the next level and go to the Department of Justice and from a false claim perspective. Usually it's just, okay, you owe some money back. Maybe we have arguments about why it's lower. GSA thinks it's higher. You meet somewhere maybe in the middle, and then you agree to some payment plan. It could be over time or lump sum, whatever. And if it's over time, there's probably some sort of interest rate. That's usually the way things go down. However, I would like to note, if you go to the next slide, there have been some, and so this is just like a recent example, and there's two things to note. One, in this particular instance, where you have a situation where a contractor didn't disclose all the information and they, according to this, right, purposefully misled the government and didn't give them all the data about the types of programs that they have to give discounts to good customers and things of that nature. And by hiding that information, they determined that the contractors knowingly committed false claims or submitted false statements. Essentially, every time they bid something or every time they were paid and cashed a check, that's considered a submitted invoice. That's considered to be false claims because they knew that the price reduction clause was triggered, they continue to do it anyway. That's sort of an outlier case where I think there's probably more risk to folks is where you're not paying attention. So if you don't know what's going on, you're just clueless because you're not even tracking your commercial sales data or not tracking it carefully enough, not paying attention, and you're billing the government over and over, and then later on something happens and you find out that you were overcharging for a while. Like I said, in most cases where I've seen that happen, it's still just, okay, pay the money back with some interest, and that's that. But in other contexts, DOJ tends to be pretty aggressive about that. And if you were completely not paying attention to the level of what they call recklessness, where you should have known that you had to have a compliance plan in place, you didn't have anything in place, you weren't paying attention, I think that raises the risk level of an auditor seeing something, and if the amounts are large enough, or if they're getting a lot of pushback and they're convinced they're right, I could see them taking something and turning it over to the Department of Justice. Because for FCA, it's not just that you did something knowingly, it's also if you did it with reckless disregard for the truth, and DOJ takes an expansive definition of reckless disregard for the truth. So that's just another reason, to Leo's point, about making sure that you're careful and you have your compliance plan in place and following best practices, which I think is the next on the list.
You know, one comment I want to make about that case, because I'm a GSA geek. I highly recommend that people read this decision, because I think that the court found, and I could be misspeaking here, but if I remember correctly, I believe the court found that the contractor had done a very poor job of managing compliance around the program, but they had set up exceptions to the PRC up front in the contract. So while they had very poor management practices, the government was still unable to calculate major damages on this particular case, because many of the things that would have been an issue were found to be exceptions. So I think it ended up being a small amount that they ended up collecting from the contractor. It might have been like maybe 1.5 million, small relative terms. But I thought that was interesting. Next one, please. So here I wanted to summarize some of the things that we have we think are best practices around managing these kinds of things. Here when before an audit, I think, again, going back to the compliance review in year 4, I think that would be a key thing to do. I think getting management buy-in, making sure that it's a priority and that it stays a priority throughout an internal examination period is key. And even if you don't have an internal audit group, taking steps to review some of the compliance pieces. So you don't have to go through every single part of it, but maybe you're going to look at your sales reporting administration, or maybe you're going to look at your how your sales team is going out there and pricing against the contract, and doing light tests throughout year 4 is a great way to start getting ready for what may happen should an audit occur in that final year of the contract period. During the actual audit, I find that it's helpful to designate a single POC for regular communication with the IG. The bold letters of being responsive, I think, is critical. The IG has a job to do, and you aren't doing yourself any favors if you are not getting back to them promptly. Typically recommend establishing a regular cadence to regroup on an audit as a team, so that everybody's kept aware of the status and remains on the same page throughout the audit. And finally, it's a good idea to request an exit conference to get an understanding of what might be present in the final audit report to be issued. The IG, in my experience, has been very gracious and open to going ahead and sharing the results. And this also gives you, especially if the CO is present in the exit conference, this gives you the opportunity to ask the CO for the report once they receive it. Next slide, please. So again, asking, you'll see it here at the top of the screen, after the report's released, asking to see the report. Other things to keep in mind, try to understand the findings. If there were issues found and there are legitimate concerns over the methodology used to develop those findings, you are able to discuss that with the CO directly to help draw attention to your view of things if you believe that the IG took an erroneous position on something. That said, GSA COs, I would say over the over the past decade have become more and more reticent to go against the IG's findings. So you'll often find yourself having to remediate the issues that the IG's found. That's why preparation is so key. And then, following the option, make sure to do periodic compliance reviews. Those, these don't have to be expensive or extremely time consuming. As I said earlier, you can look at specific aspects of compliance as a way to account for resource constraints throughout the duration of managing the contract. Next slide, please. Yeah, so of course, the overwhelming emphasis is going to be on a review of the transactional sales data that's provided, but we did want to show you the two different worlds that we're looking at here as it relates to services and products. A lot of focus on labor category qualifications when it comes to services, ensuring employees and subcontractors meet the minimum education and years of experience. From a pricing perspective, we often see cases where the government, has a hard time tracking between commercial sales and government sales. It could be different labor category names, could be a lack of, specific minimum requirements that are written into commercial contracts. In some cases, this has led to auditors, getting into the weeds over how labor categories map from various projects and customers, and in some cases, tracing individual resources, people, to see how those people were charged to various customers rather than the labor categories. And then in the worst cases, auditors and COs just throw their hands up in the air and request cost data for a labor buildup. For products, a large focus on TAA compliance. Disclosures require information like standard discounts and your MFC discounts, of course. So the auditors are also very interested in the frequency of discounts. I've seen contractors have issues where they maybe state that additional discounts are offered in special situations, but not providing the full details over how often that happens. So the depth and frequency of discounting is very important. Typically all of the items on a GSA contract are assumed to be commercial, but we have seen some contractors put a focus on situations where the same or similar items are sold to commercial and government customers, but under different product numbers. Some try to do that as a way to potentially avoid PRC implications. That sort of behavior really raises questions and raises risk for liabilities. You have to be careful with that sort of thing. So again, just providing some context around some of the things that we've seen. Next slide, please. Mandatory disclosure. So we thought it'd be helpful to provide an overview of what's been recovered by the government over the years since the mandatory disclosure rule went into effect. As background, and Sai can speak to this better than I, federal contractors are required to self-disclose credible evidence of violations of certain law and overpayments in connection with federal contract or subcontract, and failure to self-disclose to the government can lead to suspension and debarment and Civil False Claims Act implications. So here we wanted to display some of the activity that we've seen over the years. As you can see, as it relates to GSA contracts, there's we're looking at a significant overpayments related to defective pricing and PRC non-compliance as being a key issue. So contractors need to really keep those disclosure obligations in mind. The last thing that I'll say here, it's important to note that this is just tracking GSA IG figures and doesn't capture DoD IG figures. I think over the time frame shown here, there were over 1,100 DoD disclosures as compared to 130 that you see for GSA. So a significant amount. Regardless, there's been a lot of activity for the FAR disclosure team over the years, much better than the prior state, which was voluntary. Can we go on to the final slide, please? Yeah, so you know, a lot of this here at the top is sort of things that I've reiterated throughout. You know, in my mind, this is a team sport. It does not need to be adversarial. I think cooperation and responsiveness are really key themes for success in working with DIG. You know, point two, you've got a short time frame to work with in preparing a response. If you haven't prepared and you find yourself getting one of these notices, you really need to have focused attention and a team over the weeks to get the submission right. And extensions can be granted, but they're typically not significant. And then point three, making sure that your disclosures are grounded in data is very important. The more that your transactional data backs up your story, the better positioned you are. You know, I can't tell you the number of times I've seen companies prepare CSPs and, you know, based on subjective views of people, salespeople who think they understand what's happening when the data tells a much different story. So this is the piece where we're often brought in, and we have a lot of experience in that area. So you know, it pays to pay attention there. Sai, do you want to go over the last one?
Yeah, I think, you know, some of the other things is that if you're not paying attention, right, and you're not getting in front of things, doing internal reviews and things of that nature, then you're gonna have potential issues, right? And one of the main things that we see too in that regard is that individuals who they'll get a notice, or they'll start realizing there's an issue, they'll start to work with sort of outside consultants or like a friend or something like that. And you need to just be aware that any conversations you're having with anyone who's not a lawyer, that's all discoverable information, all of your internal emails in your company. If you're like, oh crap, we just got this audit, we haven't even been tracking the price reduction clause ever. Like all of that, if things get escalated, all of that is going to be turned over, or at least required to be turned over. And if you destroy it, there's a whole other problem. But those sorts of issues. And so oftentimes when these things come up, we would recommend the first sort of hint of anything would be to reach out to either your accounting firm or your law firm, and they should guide you. Like for instance, if you reach out to Leo and he looked at something, he's like, yeah, okay, everybody hold up. There's an issue here. We should bring in, and then whatever, if you have a law firm you're working with, then to bring them in. And then oftentimes what we would do is we would engage Leo, for instance, through us. And then anything that Leo does in evaluating or analyzing everything comes through us. It's all protected by attorney-client privilege. And so then none of that is discoverable if it goes forward, or if some FCA case or anything else happens. And then similarly, any sort of communication internally, you probably do it over the phone, and anything we're doing by email, if it's for legal advice, that's also privileged. So that's just, I just throw that out there because I'm just a warning, because I've definitely had FCA cases where we start to see information in emails, either internally or with just third-party consultants that are out there, and none of that's privileged. And if it's covered by any sort of subpoena or something, it all has to get turned over, which can be problematic, obviously. So just be aware of that. And as things come up, just make sure you're being careful as things progress. All right, well, I don't know if anyone has any other questions. I did see the one question, which is right after I brought up my conspiracy theory, which sort of tracked what I was saying the risk was about TDRs and everything. So.
Well, just wanted to thank everybody for their time this afternoon. I know everybody's very busy, especially as we get closer to the holidays. So thank you so much for taking your time to join us today.
Yeah, thanks everybody.